It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Joan Maxwell. Joan grew up in rural Fairfield, North Carolina, and graduated from UNC, where she received a BA in history. In 1988, Joan and her husband Owen founded Regulator Marine in an abandoned A&P Grocery Store in Edenton, North Carolina. Regulator is now operating in a 121,000 square foot manufacturing facility with over 200 employees and is one of the most well-respected center console brands in the boating industry. Joan and her team transitioned Regulator Marine from a job shop manufacturing process to a highly sophisticated lean manufacturing operation. Joan focuses on learning innovative ways to improve the business that God has entrusted to her care. She is a member of the C12 Group, a Christian-based leaders roundtable that focuses on building better businesses for a greater purpose. Joan Maxwell, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It's wonderful to have you here, and you have had a busy schedule, and I want to hear a little bit about that, traveling from all parts all over the world from what I understood. So I'm really keen to get in and hear a little bit more about your background. But let's start with the early years. Tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
I grew up in a great family, and I'm one of 4 children, and my family was made up of a lot of good Christian people, particularly my mom and my dad. And so there's that adage about being drugged, and we were drugged to church morning and noon and night if there was church. So we grew up in church. So it was it was a great growing up. I grew up in a very, very small town, and as I said, one of 4 children. So went to school at the local high school and had the privilege and honor to go to the University of North Carolina.
Where were you in the pecking order? Oldest, youngest, somewhere in the middle?
I'm the second oldest.
Okay, got it. So kind of raised some of the young ones as well, or were you all pretty close in age?
We're all pretty close in age. From oldest to youngest, there's 7 years difference between all of us. So we were all pretty close. But my mother worked, so we were often at home doing the chores necessary to keep the house running, as cooking and doing all those kinds of things.
Yeah. And what kind of work did your mom and dad do?
My dad was a forest ranger, and so he fought fires and for the state of North Carolina. My mother did some bookkeeping work, and she was also the postmaster for the little post office there, and all of 300 people. So I always put a return address on everything I send out because of my mother.
You were trained well, right? With a zip code, preferably. Right?
Absolutely.
What kind of things do you remember growing up? You said, obviously drugged to church, and I'm sure that became something that was a very common thing for you and your parents. Any other inspirations, anything that you remember growing up that you admired about them, or things that inspired you as you were young?
What I admired about my parents was that my parents somehow managed to make it possible for me to do almost anything that I wanted to go. If I wanted to go to a camp or to go on a school trip, they made it possible to do that. I don't know how they did it on the limited income that they had raising 4 children to do that.
Wow. And did you live in sort of a rural area? Were you in a city? What was the, kind of the surroundings there?
Fairfield was a very, very small community, 300 people. The whole county has 5,000 people in it. So it's very, very rural. In fact, it's probably one of the most rural counties in North Carolina. So, the adage down that some people use is fish, farm, or leave when you grow up. So obviously I did not either fish or farm. So
you ended up leaving, right?
Yes, but I didn't get far, Brent. I'm 60 miles from home.
Nice. And how many churches were in that town?
Golly, there are 3-4 churches in that little town.
Yeah, nice. And did you come to Christ early in your upbringing? Was that something you came to later as an adult? Tell us a little bit about the role he played in your life.
Well, I grew up knowing about God, and I was baptized at a fairly early age, and I grew up learning a lot about the scriptures, but it was really as an adult that I understood the relationship piece of being a true child of God and what that means to be a child of God.
Was that before getting married, or is that something that you and Owen shared as you kind of grew up together and grew your business together, which we'll get to in a minute?
Well, actually more as an adult. Again, I went to church. I did all those things that you're supposed to do because you say you're a Christian.
Right.
And but the real owning of my faith came much, much later. And that, even having taught Bible studies and done things like that, really not fully understanding and claiming the true relationship with Jesus. And so once I did that, I understood freedom like I'd never understood freedom before.
Were you a good student in school back in those early days?
I was a good high school student.
Yeah. Okay.
I never really had to study. I could kind of get by. And I was not a good student in college. There were a lot of things to be involved in. I, was involved with Campus Christian Fellowship again.
Nice.
Not really understanding so much that walk as it is, this is what you grow up doing. So that's sort of what you're supposed to do, right? But not really that great a student. I mean, I was okay, I guess, but I wouldn't even say I was okay. I wasn't that great a student.
What were some of the other distractions? Were you involved in sports, music, theater? You mentioned campus involvement in fellowship and so forth. But what other kinds of things in high school were you involved with?
Oh, in high school's every club coming and going. From 4-H to Beta Club to whatever it happened to be. I mean, in a small rural area, that's what you do. I mean, you're just involved in all kinds of things like that. Right. In college, it was more, there's just things to do. There's a movie theater to go to. There's at the University of North Carolina, there was always a sporting event to go to. And so I love sports. And so it was wonderful to particularly basketball.
Big basketball team. That's right.
Oh, wow. I love basketball.
That's a beautiful campus. Our daughter looked at UNC and Duke, and we spent a good week and a half or so down in that part of the country. Beautiful down there.
Well, we tend to think so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Boating obviously came into your life, certainly through your work. Was that an early interest as well, or did that come a little bit later?
That really came a little bit later. My dad had a small boat that he shrimped on, and it was a little 17-foot boat, and it had a well in the middle of it, and he pulled a little shrimp net, and I think it was an escape from everybody when he could go out on the boat. But when I met Owen, Owen was a big boater. So that's how we spent time in our dating. He and his dad owned a boat together, so we spent our time on the boat. And so that really introduced me to recreational boating and fishing.
And before you started the business, were there entrepreneurial things that you did as a kid? Were you involved in things, high school and college, that kind of preceded your starting up Regulator Marine, or other types of entrepreneurial things that you got involved with younger?
I don't really think of anything as being entrepreneurial. I think when you live in the country, you kind of figure things out and have to do things. But
Right.
I don't really think that there was anything entrepreneurial. I think that probably the whole idea of doing something was really coming from Owen and starting.
Okay.
He wanted to build a boat, so we started Regulator with building a boat, and slowly there became opportunity to just develop things. We need to develop a market. We need to develop an accounting system. Then Owen is a wonderful and great idea person, but it's how do you take that and now make it where somebody else can do it? Obviously you didn't want to build every boat that came through the door. Right. And so it took that both of us coming together to take the talents that the Lord had given both of us to figure out how to make Regulator successful. Yeah, so it's taking a great product and then building a great company around that product.
Oh, yeah, that makes great sense. And did you meet in college, or was it after you'd finished your university?
After, actually, it was, I think, one semester. I needed to finish one course to get my degree. And I met Owen when he was as a farm manager. So he had come down to where I grew up in Hyde County, and he was managing a big corporate farm down there. And so we were 22, 23 years old and 25. So I think he was 24. And so we met about that same time. So it's a time in life when people are thinking about what's next, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, and you studied history in college. Did you have something in mind that you wanted to do while you're obtaining your degree?
I did. I thought I wanted to go to law school, but I didn't work hard enough and get good enough grades. So it didn't work out for me to do that. And so here I am at Regulator.
Yeah. So was that kind of the first job then out of college when you and Owen met and got the business started right away, or were there other things that you did beforehand?
There were other things. I met Owen when I had two jobs going at the same time. I was working as a bookkeeper. My mother had been a bookkeeper for this produce company. And so she was working as postmaster, and she was the interim. And so she said, I don't know if they're going to hire me or not. So I need to get this job covered. So I was like, well, I don't know anything about this. She said, I'll teach you. And so she did. And so I learned a lot of very practical things that, are very simple things that apply to any business. Right. So I learned them in that process. Well, at the same time, I was also working for the ASCS, which is a government job, Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation. So Owen would have to come in and register his crops for the corporate farm. So he made a lot of trips to the ASCS office.
Particularly after meeting you the first time, I'm sure.
Yes.
What were some of those lessons that Mom taught you early on?
That's really about keeping up with payroll. So if you really want to understand a payroll system, you run a weekly payroll manually for over 50 people. Okay, when you do that, you understand a lot of things about, number one, how the government side of that works, but also how important it is to make sure that everybody's payroll is accurate, because that's the one thing that really breeds distrust with employees.
Well, you messed that up.
Yes, exactly. So if that payroll is not correct, what happens is there's a distrust, not just with the payroll clerk, but everybody in management.
Yeah. So it's so true. I was literally doing payroll before the podcast today, so I can really identify that with Joan. And every month, I make sure I go through the register and the summaries and make sure all the numbers are right, because there's nothing worse than destroying that. You can lose a lot of trust in a very short period of time.
Absolutely.
That's terrific. And when did you start managing people? Was that in one of those jobs, or did that come later?
It really came later. I actually, after Owen and I were first married, I worked some retail stuff and, kind of looking, I would work for this lady and it was like, there's these things you can do. It would make, you'd want to turn this inventory. And it's like, we'll just put it in the back and wait till next year and bring it out. It's like, these kinds of things. And because I have this degree in history, that
Sure.
I work for Historic Edenton giving tours, and I always tell people it's my most fun and least paid job I ever had because I got to meet with people and talk to people from all over the country that were traveling through here. So it wasn't really a job that taught me business skills or anything, but it certainly did hone some interpersonal skills.
Yeah, and customer service, I'm sure, right? Working with the public. Do you still have a soft place in your heart for history? Do you do a lot of reading and so forth? Is that still something that's important to you?
I do have a soft place in my heart for history. And most recently, I've been reading more about World War II and spending some time looking at Iwo Jima and Chichijima. So it's a very fascinating era. So I've been doing a little reading on that.
So you and Owen met. He got you out on the boat. You began making your first one. Now, was that making it for someone else, or was that making the boat for the two of you? What was that first project?
The first project was really a project for the public, but it wasn't thinking like, this is going to someday be this company, a large company. It was maybe a few boats or whatever, but it was a focus on making something that was beyond just one unit, because in order to build multiple boats, we needed to build molds for those boats. So that means building a wooden form, which is called a plug, and from that plug, making a mold from that. So the whole idea was we have to have a way to build multiples of something.
Well, did it kind of start as a hobby? Because he didn't come from the boat building industry, right? I mean, that was not his family business or even his forte when you met. How did that come about?
He always loved boats, and he was with a local boat company here in town for about 18 months, very short period of time, and it became very evident that company was very rooted in the way it was doing business. It didn't want to look at anything new, and they were building cuddy cabin style boats, and Owen had in his head and heart a center console. So back
up a little bit. Now you better tell me the difference between those, because I'm not a boat person. So you're throwing some terminology at me here.
A cabin boat is that. It has more sleeping arrangements in it. And a center console is just basically an area where you operate the boat from the helm. Okay. And it may have a small compartment underneath of the helm. And some people, at the time we started Regulator, there were very few people that were actually putting a bathroom on a boat. A bathroom is called a head.
Right, right.
So there were very few people putting a head in. And so we ended up putting a head in the boat, and it sort of set the standard. The first boat that we built, the 26, the first model, not the first boat, but the first model that we built, it really set a standard for center consoles that really stands even today.
Wow. And do you do both center consoles as well as cabin boats now?
No, we only at Regulator do center consoles. The other company that Owen was with had no interest in a center console.
Right. Got
so it really opened the door for us to kind of step out. When you're 28 and 30 years old, you don't know what you don't know. So, I mean, if it's just like if somebody says no, you say, okay, well, that's fine. The next person will say yes. And so you really just have drive that I think, and really, what do you have to risk at that age?
Right, exactly.
The older that we get, the more things we all seem to accumulate. So
that's right.
It tends to be that there are more things at risk for decisions made.
So the two of you, late 20s, early 30s, with a center console, you're kind of limited in size, right? You don't go more than, 24, 30 feet long? Or
Well,
do you actually?
the design parameter around that boat was 23 to 25 feet. It turned
23
out
to
to be
25.
it turned out to be a 26.
Okay.
Today, there are boats that are 60 feet long being pushed by outboard motors.
Wow. That are
Uh,
center console only.
Yes. Yeah, and because the boat now has gotten larger, there's more room underneath the console, and there are actually sleeping quarters underneath. We do that with our 34 and 41 foot models now. But the limiting factors were the fact that there wasn't horsepower large enough to push these bigger boats. So now
Now they have that. Yeah,
now there is.
fantastic. So got the first couple of boats out. You obviously had some success. Gosh, how many years later now? How many employees? How big are you folks?
We have about 230 people.
Wow, fantastic.
And we've built roughly 5,000 boats at this point.
My goodness.
And so they vary in
Fantastic.
size from 23 to 41 feet.
Right. Great. And when did you know you were successful?
Honestly, when we floated the first boat.
Really?
Because it performed better than we ever dreamed it would.
Yeah.
It ran over 50 miles an hour with twin 200 outboard engines on it, and it floated upright, and it did all the things it was supposed to do as a boat. So that was we've often looked back and we say, that is the day Regulator was a success.
That's fantastic. And did you have a staff at that stage? Did you have contractors that were building it? I mean, how much were you and Owen directly involved in the molding as well as the building of the boat?
Well, Owen was much more involved in the actual building of the boat itself. I've spent 3 weeks sanding as we prepared the mold, the wooden mold, the wooden plug for the mold. And I said, you know what? There's something else I can do for this company, but I can promise you it is not sanding on this plug. Because
you had your share of sanding.
I had my share, because there's a big long board, which is what we call the torture board. It's like 3 feet long and it's weighted so that when you're sanding on this plug, you make sure that you have no ripples or edges in it, because you're going to make the mold off of that. So any imperfection in that plug is going to transfer to that mold. So we considered it a success when we floated the boat, and it was just incredible.
That's fantastic. And then did you add employees pretty much straight away? Did you get other orders that came right on the back of that?
Well, we actually had added a few employees along the way. Our first employee, we still laugh about this kid. He came to work for us because he had got involved with some pranks in town. It wasn't anything horrible, but his dad was a little bit concerned that he had a little too much free time. And our first building where we were building was located right across from the high school. So this kid would walk across from school and go to work, so he would be out of trouble.
That's right.
And our next employee was a kid that, again, the dad kind of stepped in on. This kid was in college, and he had failed his first semester. So his dad wanted to teach him about hard work. So we really laughed about this kid. He went all the way through college. He worked a semester and then decided that college was not a bad deal. And so he went back to school and was like top of the class, dean's list or something. He did well. Bottom line is he did well after his time at Regulator. So we added more people on. We also added on other skilled people.
Right.
Because certainly I had no boat building skills, but Owen had limited boat building skills and woodworking skills. So we found some craftsmen in the area that helped us to get started. We've been in this current location since 1990. So when we came over here, we probably had about 13 people when we came here.
Now, I assume Owen was a believer when you met. Is that correct?
Yes, he was. He was.
And you and I met through C12, Group C12, which obviously is a a Christian business owners organization. What was Christ involved in the business? Did you bring him in early on as it relates to kind of you guys getting started, or is that something that's evolved over time?
We brought him in, but I don't think we brought him in as a full partner. I think maybe that's a better way of looking at it. We probably brought him in as a partner instead of as the CEO.
Ah, right. Got it.
And so as the business has grown and as our faith has grown, we've seen how much better life is when we listen to his leading and not our own.
And when did that really kind of take place? Was that with your C12 membership? Did that kind of, kick in at that time, or had you two been working on that prior to coming into C12?
We had been working on that prior to coming into C12, and so C12 just helps us take tools that we learn or I learn every month and bring back in. Right. We have right now 2 of our members from our executive team are in the key players group, and
fantastic!
In January we'll add another person in at that point.
Now, have you kind of been co-CEOs? Have you always been CEO, or have you guys changed roles over the years? How's that evolved in a husband and wife team?
Our roles have changed as time's gone on. Initially, Owen was the president for about 8-9 years, and then really I was the face of Regulator. So I was the person that was out calling on the dealers, seeing the dealers, being involved in industry events. And we had a salesman at that point in time, and he said, "Why is Joan not the president?" And we both said, that makes sense. So we just, did a little bylaw change, and there we go, right?
Yeah, and are you a woman-owned business? Did you go through that transaction as well, or did you not need to do that?
We did not need to do that. And actually, I'm not even sure we had to do a bylaw change. I know it's in their minutes, our annual meeting minutes.
And how long has that been that you've been president then?
Over 20 years.
Oh, right. Okay, so the lion's share. How would you say your leadership style has evolved over that time, Joan?
I think my leadership style has changed to trust the people put in place and making sure that I'm not second guessing their decisions, asking them questions.
Right.
The appropriate questions, I hope, but asking them questions. And I really have to work on not going around them because I have a desire to solve a problem quickly. Because if I solve it quickly, then that means something else can get done. So I have to be careful not to run over people.
Yeah. The idea is to hire good people and let them do their job, right?
Correct.
How do you decide when it's time to kind of micromanage somebody or when it's time to stay out of their sandbox?
That's a difficult question because each situation varies on doing it. I think when I see things that will have longer term effects on Regulator and its dealer network, I will tend to jump faster. If it's an internal issue that we're helping somebody to learn a skill and they're not going to be forward facing with our customers or with our dealers, then I'll tend to be a little slower on the response on that.
Yeah. Let them make a mistake or two as long as it's not too bad a mistake or a customer facing one, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. If it's something that's going to affect the image of Regulator, I'm very quick to step in on that. My dad used to tell us, "I have given you a good name and it's up to you to keep it."
I like that.
Yes, and it is a very powerful thing to think about of a legacy and a responsibility that is
ours
as operators and owners of God's company here.
Right.
And also when we put his name on. So we say this is a Christian company, then we have to make sure that the things that we say are the things that we walk.
Yeah, people look very closely at that.
Yes, they do.
Is that something that you, in your mission and your core values, communicate to folks that are in the company and or that you're recruiting?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. our mission is to build the best center console sport fishing boats with people, process, and resources to honor God.
Nice.
So that's throughout our website. It's everything that we have printed out on our boards. We have information boards where people meet every day. So every different team has what's called an SQDIP. It's safety, quality, delivery, inventory, and productivity. So at these boards every day, one of the things that are discussed are either a core value for the day or the vision and mission.
And so do you think that helps you as well in terms of recruiting? Do people self-select because they know you're a faith-based company?
Some do, yes. Mm-hmm. And what it's also been a real test for us, Brand, is to make sure that we do not let a qualification get above a walk. And so we really look at, and the vice versa of that. You can have somebody who's got an incredible walk with the Lord, but they're not capable to do the job.
Right.
So it's marrying both of those things together.
Yeah.
And what really is exciting is when we can find somebody who has both of those things, and we go, yes.
Bingo. Double check. Double box.
Yes, you are the right person in the right seat on our bus.
I love it. Tell me a little bit about, building your company culture. At first it was you and Owen, and then you had, a couple of kids from the high school who needed some straightening out. And then, of course, you added some folks that were, expert, boat builders, I'm sure, over time. And of course, You've expanded it. Tell me a little bit about how the company culture has evolved.
The company culture evolves basically for us around establishing that vision and mission and figuring out ways to communicate that. So it's not just a matter of let's read it off the card every day, but what does that mean to us? So how do we live it out in what we do? When we start talking about personal accountability, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So living it out, what does it mean to be a good steward? So living it out. So as far as teaching that culture, it's a matter of reinforcing it in many ways. Communications with people that we write, or a reminder when we have a company meeting, what that means. And we encourage our folks to understand that we build a product that is a very unique product in that we get to build it for a great customer. So we encourage our part of our culture is also that we are open and friendly. So that when people come in, that we recognize that the people doing the work wherever we are in this plant are the experts. So that person doing that job knows more about that job than I do, and they should. It's their job.
Right.
So when we have people come in, it's to say, okay, Cindy, tell this gentleman what you're doing. Or, Jim, I'd like to introduce you to Darren. Let me show you what Darren's doing. Or Darren, better yet, you tell him what you're doing. So that culture of you're the expert, you share it, and people come through here all the time, and they talk to us about how friendly and nice our people are here.
Yeah.
And they are because they're encouraged to be.
Right.
And they are naturally.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that. I remember John Nordstrom, the son of the Nordstrom, department store chain, which of course is very big on the West Coast. I don't know if you've got any Nordstroms down in North Carolina, but they're really known for their customer service. And he was asked one time, well, how do you train? How do you develop these people? What do you do? They're such good in customer service. He goes, train and develop. He said they were raised that way.
Yeah.
And he was a good recruiter, right? He was able to find the people that had that type of upbringing. So that kind of leads me to my next question. Joan, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in?
Well, I look at first of all, we talked about skill sets, and we also talk about whether they're a cultural fit.
Right.
I will tell you, in our customer service area, we have an incredible guy who's head of that department. And Al has what I call the heart of a servant, because whatever it is, he's going to jump in and help. So if he sees somebody walking through the front office and they've got armloads of stuff, how can I help you? So his how can I help you lives in every aspect of his life.
Right.
So when we're looking for people, it really depends upon what the position is that we're looking for them to do. So the most important thing that we want to look for is, do they have the skill set, and do they have a heart for the Lord?
Yeah.
And especially that becomes, the higher up in the level of the company, it becomes more and more important because they are leading and influencing people.
Well, Joan Maxwell, the time has just flown by. Thank you so much for providing your insights. There's always one last question, though, that we ask. And, what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone that, has their eyes on becoming president, maybe after their husband has served for a while, or maybe before he or she does, and, or perhaps, to become an entrepreneur like you? What kind of things, someone's maybe 10, 15, 20 years behind you in their career, would you tell them about that? And, what kind of advice and counsel and direction would you provide?
I would tell them to be very diligent to find answers. So to not take the easy answer for somebody who comes in and just says, I can't do it. There's always a way that something can be done. So it's figuring it out. So do not give up, because there'll be days as an entrepreneur that you'll want to give up, or you'll want to sit in the C-suite. You'll want to give up. But the reality is that passes very quickly.
Right.
So I would say be determined, and to be continually learning about whatever area of focus yours is. If you want to be the president of a company, you need to be the expert on every aspect of that business.
Right.
You don't have to do it all.
Right.
But you need to know how it's done. So I don't know if that helps anybody.
Amen.
But that's what I would give them.
Well, Joan Maxwell, president of Regulator Marine, thank you so much for sharing your story into the Corner Office.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Handley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the Corner Office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.